All right, we're about to start. We'll get a 3 count.
I think you and I are
All right, we're live. Joe, we're good to go.
We're good. All right. Excellent.
Saw.
Well, welcome everyone to Queer's a Three-Sided Die. This is a panel where we talk with queer game creators about kind of a pair of sort of interrelated topics, one of which is kind of what it's like to be queer as a professional in the gaming industry, and also, you know, the sort of what the process looks like for bringing queerness into the games that we create, and on a more practical level into the games that we run, and that sort of thing. We've been doing these panels for quite a while now. Yeah. And so we kind of like them to, on some level, be sort of a conversation, because as most of the lovely folks up here who know me know, I can talk and literally not shut up for the entire time that we have. But it's much more relevant and much more interesting to find out sort of what your questions are, and that kind of thing. So we'll probably go through some introductions, maybe talk about the games that we have worked on, and kind of the ways in which we, you know, sort of bring queerness both to the industry and to the kind of games that we have created, and you know, and that sort of thing. And then we'll kind of branch out and see where it goes from there. I'm very sorry. I know this convention has a number of incredibly skilled, very on-point moderators. I am not one of them. So we'll probably wander all along, and I'm sad to say all of you are along for the ride. So, my name is Joseph Carriker. I am a developer for Green Ronin Publishing. I am the line developer for the Blue Rose Age line, which is a very, very queer-focused, queer-friendly role-playing game. I am also currently working as the co-developer with Tanya on developing the 5th season role-playing, which is a role-playing game based on N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth cycle, yeah.
My name's Steve Kenson. I am a staff designer with Green Ronin Publishing. I'm also owner and operator of Ad Infinitum Adventures, my own imprint that does Icon's superpowered role-playing. I have been writing in the game industry since 1995. And have worked on a long list of projects since then. Most recently, projects like the Expanse role-playing game for Green Ronin, the new edition of Aberrant for Onyx Path, and a variety of Fantasy Age, Blue Rose, and other assorted projects.
I'm Taya Steere, and I do not work in the development industry at all. I'm here from the community side of things. I really work on or participate in a lot of queer-focused gaming communities and feel that it's a source of positive change in our communities and social interaction. And here, really, I agreed to participate on this panel as, you know, to be that kind of community representation, because we're talking about products that the community wants and wants to see ourselves in.
I'm Jeremy Crawford. I'm the lead rules designer of Dungeons & Dragons, as well as the lead designer of the 5th edition D&D Player's Handbook. And if you've seen a 5th edition book, I have worked on it in some capacity or other. My most recent baby that I worked on with our team was the Eberron Rising from the Last War book that just came out this past November.
My name is Tanya DePass. I am your diversity and programming coordinator for the convention, and also, as Joe said, working on the 5th season RPG. I've also worked with Green Ronin previously on Modern Age things, and with Paizo most recently on Lost Omens World Guide. if you read the Mwangi Expanse, that was my fault / my doing. And also working with Paizo on some other stuff yet to come.
Hi, I'm Bianca Anderson. I'm kind of a baby developer, which sounds weird because I worked in video games for 6 years, but I never worked on the development side. I am working on, I'm allowed to say it, right?
Absolutely.
I'm working on the what are we calling it? The fifth season role-playing game, and also weirdly enough, in my day-to-day life, I work at a law firm that deals with helping victims of domestic violence, particularly from marginalized communities, including the LGBT community.
Awesome. All right, well, so as part of this process, one of the things that we found to be tremendously sort of successful is to talk a little bit about the queerness in games that we sort of find, and you know, some of our sort of favorite games. So I'd like to go down the line, and we can start with you, Bianca, if you'd prefer.
Sure.
And just kind of honestly tell me some of your favorite queer content from games, particularly like maybe the first time you encountered it and your sort of reaction to that.
So like many people, BioWare was my first introduction to queer romances in games. And I had heard that they had them, which means that when I started playing Star Wars The Old Republic, I was really mad that I had to. I was like, why do I have to romance this guy instead of kicking him out an airlock when there is a cute Twi'lek right there who I love. So yeah, I was real mad about that. And then I played Dragon Age, which is Tanya's fault. To this day, I have Bull on my phone as my background, so you've seen it. Okay. But yeah, so that was my first experience. I have now played all of the Dragon Age games more times and for more hours than I'm ever going to admit publicly. So yeah, I like some of them, I don't like others, and then I like the option of role-playing games now, which I sort of didn't get into until I was older. I just played a game with Tanya, it was a lot of fun. I wore horns. And so just assume that anytime I make a character or write a character, they're gay as hell. Mm-hmm. So everyone's queer, and that's just sort of my attitude towards games. But yeah, so I guess BioWare games are kind of like my favorite, even though they're sort of my on-again, off-again romance.
Are they a bad romance?
Oh, God.
She's going to murder me after this panel.
I might murder you right here in the panel.
It's being recorded. You cannot. For me, it's a toss-up because I'm the old nerd that likes a lot of BioWare games. But also, fan fiction was actually kind of my gateway into the queerness, and both creating what I wanted to see that wasn't there, and in a place that I will never ever tell you exists, because I'm never telling you my old online fanfiction.net handle. I've written a lot of Power Rangers fic that is like the gayest of gay fic, but it was also, before I knew what like actual good gay sex should have been written out, it was terrible. I don't want to ever admit that I wrote this, but it's out there. And then BioWare came along, and it's actually N.K. Jemisin's fault that I started playing Mass Effect. She talked to me about Garrus and the scene where he shows up in Mass Effect 2, and I was like, I kind of hate you for now for doing this to me. And I have played both Mass Effect series and Dragon Age more times than I care to admit. And also The Sims. I have the gayest Sims you could find on any planet, anywhere. And if I could only find a good polyamory mod for my Sims, I'd be so happy.
So my first encounter with queer content in a game was queer content that my friends and I introduced in our own tabletop role-playing games, many years ago, because I started playing D&D when I was around 6 years old. So this was first edition D&D. I was introduced to it by my sister Amy, who is, like me, also queer. My brother, by the way, is also queer. We often joke that our family is just a gay pride parade in family form. So for me, just simply because of who we are and what we wanted to explore. There has always been a queer undercurrent in my tabletop experience. When it came to actually playing games where it was officially a thing, there weren't a whole lot of options. And so when given the option years ago, working with Steve over here, I helped create the Blue Rose role-playing game in its original incarnation, essentially wanting to create a queer game because there weren't any that we could go to. I mean, at that point, there were games like Vampire and others that would occasionally sort of tip their hat toward queer content, but nothing where it was embedded firmly in the world building and celebrated in a very open way. And so that was something that we did in Blue Rose that I think has only been amplified in the new edition of Blue Rose. Yes. And then, so when it came time to work on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, really for me it was just a continuation of that. Let's make sure queer content is present right off the bat in the player's handbook, and then we have ensured that that continues to be the case in all of our recent D&D stories. So much so that one thing I really love is now that it's taken for granted that we will have queer characters in every adventure we publish, and as far as I'm concerned, we can only do more and more and more. So it's like we've now established as a baseline that queer people will be present, which I love, because then we can just keep ramping it up.
So kind of getting into gaming and going back to some of the ones already mentioned, like The Sims was definitely the first one where I was like, the first thing I did was try to toss all the guys out of the house and call it a day. But even going back to like the Gold Box games and Bard's Tale and stuff, where I would put my party together just of all female characters because, of course, 13-year-old me not having a clue about being trans or anything was like, lesbians are cool. But yeah, but really it was like putting my own content into the games when they didn't even have it, and kind of realizing later what some of the significance of that was and putting that in. And even and then bringing it into my more modern game, I gave, I did an hour panel yesterday on queerness and MTG. We could have easily talked for 3 hours because we had a lot more to talk about on that, but that is kind of the content that's there. And fanfic being a great mention is, especially with some of the story issues going on now, the fanfic being an important part of filling in some of those holes. And it's really seeing myself and people like me presented in media is so important and it's important for a lot of us in the communities that have built up around these games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dating myself, but like Jeremy, my first experience with queerness in gaming was basically what I brought to the table as far as that went. I basically came out through playing role-playing games. It was a safe space for me to be try on different modes of being. And to sort of test the waters of what friends in my social circles would think about that. And it was pretty much how, as a college age, student, I came out to my friends. It was I progressed through experimenting through my characters, and then by the time I had coming out conversations with my friends, most of them were like, yeah, we kind of figured. But when at that time, there basically was no queer content in gaming. There was very little queer content in media in general, so far as that went. And when I was first working professionally in the industry, one of my first novels for Shadowrun was one of the first gaming tie-ins that I was familiar with that had a queer protagonist in it. So it was very much about including ourselves, and that's something that we've had to do, for a very long time. Is we create our own spaces, and we find ways to include ourselves into, everything around us.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting listening to all the sort of kind of opening narratives down the line, because for so many of us, it's a matter of, and this is true of queer people for a lot of topics in general, we often didn't have the luxury of waiting for other people to include us. So we had to include ourselves, right? We had to tell our own stories. Sometimes we had to, innovate entire venues in which to do so that we could. And I absolutely think that one of the great things about particularly role-playing as a game is that it provides that outlet for people to tell stories in some capacity, right? And the opportunity for us to tell our own stories, albeit from a little degree of safety, right? Like, as Steve mentions, I know so many queer people who kind of tested the ground just outside the closet through a variety of characters, and then saw how people reacted and that sort of thing. It's one of the reasons why I am a big fan of building new gaming groups that are made up of queer people. In my experience, I find that for queer folks who did not kind of have that opportunity, who did not get into gaming early, a number of them have always been interested in gaming, but there was also that recognition that sometimes the sort of vulnerability that happens at a gaming table, even just in potential, right? Even if it doesn't get there that often, but just the potential of it is really scary when you're queer and trying to keep all of that inside. And so I would be willing to bet that there's a lot of you who know queer people who might be interested in gaming, and who just need somebody who's willing to be like, hey, have you ever thought about it? Do you know anything about it? They may very well surprise you. And yeah, so having the opportunity to kind of tell our own stories, I feel is very important. Yeah. All right, well, are there any other particular topics that our panelists would like to jump in on? Otherwise, we can kind of start seeing what sort of questions are out there, because again, I really like the opportunity to get questions that are sort of focused on, what your thoughts are, right? Like whether it's, what's the best way to introduce a queer character into this setting, or whatever they are, right? The best conversations always come from those.
Well, I want to be that person to talk about the intersection of queerness and race and representation, because a lot of times you have to pick one or the other. You won't find characters that are both clearly not a white person and queer, or the crux of their issues and their angst and ennui in the world is, I'm gay, or I'm queer, or I'm bi, or I'm trans, and I have not accepted myself, therefore the world is going to hate me if I ever try to come out. And that is like the whole entirety of their being, and that's right. Everything that consumes the character. And when you add in the racial component, if it's a game, well, just in real life, not even in the game section, because there's so many people that I know that are people of color and queer, and they feel like they have to choose one, or the world treats them like they have to choose one. Because, there's the stereotype and the myth and the lie that inherently black people are homophobic. Right. Well, I kind of don't hate myself most of the time. So what do we do with that? And games often, at least tabletop games, can give us a chance to explore that. But then, like the panel we just did, you have to think about, if I am vulnerable with you, if I'm sitting at a table, let's say with everyone here, and I go, well, my character is queer and black, and this is her backstory, am I safe enough to have that vulnerability with you? My character on Rivals Waterdeep, which is the actual play I'm on, that is her backstory. She is married, her wife was killed, and yes, I know I did literally bury your gays trope. I'm bad player. But it was also the fuel for her oath of vengeance. And eventually, hopefully, she'll get some revenge. But no one batted an eye. No one cares that my character has a wife instead of a husband as a backstory. And when we went deep into that backstory, the episode where we really revealed what happened, how much this hurt her, and how it changed her, the people watching the show didn't even want to do Q&A like we normally do in character, because they're like, your character's been through enough. We're going to leave her alone now.
Yeah, I'm gonna, obviously, I have opinions about everything, to be honest. But I think one of the issues with that, and it makes you very cautious because, like, okay, some of my best friends are white, and my husband and my mom. So, like, I like white people.
Drink my wine.
But the issue is, a lot of times, too, like, you'll get people who want to play the other, which is great, until they choose a character who's black, and then suddenly it's the sassy black woman. Or, remember when I almost got with a fight in a guy at GamerX3, because he...
No, it's been nice seeing you all. Goodbye.
Yeah, so ignore that. But it can be really difficult to play a game if there are people who want to create characters that are like you but don't have the respect for that cultural understanding, and certainly don't respect you. Like, if that happened, I would be out so fast, it would just be like at warp speed. And that's another thing that, like, it's one of those things that when you're a person of color, even in the queer community, which is supposed to be, you know, obviously super welcoming. We're like, oh, we're all in this together, you know, taste the rainbow, whatever. But the issue is, you don't know until you get into these situations a lot of times what people are actually going to be like. There are blind spots that are inevitable, and then sometimes you're there and you're like, wow, I thought you were cool, and now I am really uncomfortable with this situation. So that is definitely something that can be a real issue. Like, not even yourself necessarily. Like, sure, I can play a black character, or I'm mixed, so I'm always drawn to, like, you know, half elves and things like that. So just as a, you know, a secondary expression of that experience. But it's a real crapshoot sometimes whether you're going to be able to get that acceptance and respect in the community, because just because you're gay doesn't mean you can't be racist. Like, that's just kind of the nature of the thing. Like, one does not preclude the other, and I find a lot of people seem to think that it does, and that gets real frustrating. But yeah, so that's another issue that I think deals with that intersection is, are you comfortable enough to be vulnerable, and are you going to be okay with the characters that people choose to play?
It actually makes me think of something that was Joe's fault in a good way. No, it was a good thing. But someone was talking about a Kickstarter project that had an Afrocentric setting, and it kicked off playing the other, and this whole discussion about it. And a lot of times people will try RPGs as a way of dressing up and using a culture or something as a character, which is not okay. But it made me think of that because while it was specifically about race in that instance, if someone's questioning, if they don't know where they kind of lie on themselves, or are they comfortable with themselves, are they comfortable enough to come out even if they've accepted themselves, that's something to think about. Because, you know, while I know everyone on this panel, we all have not sat at a table together. And, you know, you're being vulnerable, and how do you deal with that? And what do you do if you do sit at a table with people you thought you knew and it's not okay with them? I like how we're all just staring at each other. Because like Joe, I could just talk for the whole panel. I'm trying not to do that.
Yeah, no, I think being aware of the group, and being willing to, you know, Tanya used the exact perfect term for that. There's a vulnerability there, right? And so it is possible, though, for us to take deliberate actions to make our groups safer for people, right? Being willing to provide tools and sort of table traditions and sort of assumed, for lack of a better term, kind of protocols to how we want to deal with, and not just dealing with issues of marginalized identity, but anything else, right? Things like phobias and this sort of thing. Establishing for your group how the group is going to navigate any one or more individuals at the table having a difficulty with that is extremely important. A very, very useful tool. You know, and the reality is some groups can be super lax about it because everyone does know, you know, everyone. Like one of my main gaming groups, I've gamed with everyone at that table for in excess of 15 years. And like in general, I know how folks are going to react and where people are at, and this sort of thing. And so we can afford to be a little lax about having things like, for example, an X card. Because we're all comfortable enough and have done so, right? We've demonstrably done so in the past to say, you know, I'm going to need to take a minute. Or is it cool if we wrap up early because this is hitting me kind of hard, right? And then we check in with one another. But for those who may not have that sort of, and admittedly those sorts of groups are rare, having tools at the table, I mentioned the X card earlier, for any who may not be aware of, this is literally just a simple card that if anyone at any time at the table is having difficulty, again, whether it's being uncomfortable with some form of marginalization, or just not really being comfortable where their story is going, or, you know, if you're an arachnophobe and spiders come up, whatever, right? It's literally just the ability to either hold up the card or kind of reach out and sort of tap the card to get people's attention. And it allows everyone at the table who has agreed, right? They've all agreed that this mechanism is in play to just sort of organically pull away from that. And there are a variety of excellent tools for that sort of thing. We often recommend. Does anybody want to describe what a session 0 is? That would be great.
Sure. I mean, basically, session 0 is sort of the planning stage of a campaign, particularly for a role-playing game, and it's where, amongst other things, you talk about essentially the ground rules of the game. You talk about things like its high concept, and this is what this game is going to be about, and this is the kind of story we want to tell. You know, and you have a conversation between the game master and the players and within the group that basically says, so given the context of this story, what sort of characters are you thinking about? You know, what sort of things would you like to play? What sort of things would you like to see? What sort of things would you not like to see in this particular campaign? So if, for example, I was conducting a session 0 for a horror campaign, and I said, so the high concept of this campaign is that your characters are people who have been exposed to the supernatural in such a way that they are aware that it exists in the way other people don't. And you have taken it upon yourselves to be responsible to help people who are threatened by the supernatural in some way. What sort of characters are you thinking of playing, and what do you think maybe was their catalyzing experience that brought them into this? And we could start having a conversation about that so that some of those elements won't necessarily enter the game table as a surprise to anyone, so that someone isn't going to suddenly drop, oh, well, my character was violently assaulted in this way, and that is what brought them into this particular experience in a way that someone else at the game table might find disturbing or have a problem with. Because we've already talked in advance and we've said, you know, I think that element might be a problem. Maybe we should look for something else for this particular character, you know, for this particular game. Or we've had an opportunity for people to say, you know, I'm fine with certain kinds of scares in a horror game, but there are certain kinds of subjects of horror I really don't want to see in this game, because it will be just not only unfun, but just really difficult for me.
One of the things I love about having those initial conversations is if you are the game master, your players will often actually do a ton of creative work for you up front, because in addition to it being a chance to see the things to avoid, for me, even more importantly, it's about what things to embrace. Because your players, if you let them, will often tell you right up front, this is what we're hungry for. And that can include going to, sort of what the heart of this panel is, that can include discovering someone is really hungry for queer content in your campaign. That can be an especially important discovery if you happen to be a queer DM, DMing maybe for people you don't know particularly well. And so my spider sense would go off if I suddenly detect, okay, there is someone else at the table who would like a truck to back up filled with queerness and have it delivered delivered to this. And Session Zero is also often a chance, if you happen to have somebody who is exploring their own identity, it is a way for them to safely, as they talk about their character, if you really listen, they will sometimes disclose queer aspects to their character. And by here, when I say queer, I mean this can be have to do with the character's sexuality. It might have to do with their character's gender identity. I think whenever I hear those notes in somebody's description of their character and what it is they're seeking in the campaign, then I try to validate that in the campaign by making also there be other characters like them. For instance, if somebody really wants to explore their character being trans, for instance, well, I want to make sure that character, and then by extension, especially the player, if I know the player, if for whom this is a personal issue, I want to make sure they see other characters like them in the setting. So that's also important, a grace to do to each person so that they know they're not alone. And that can be a really powerful part of the storytelling.
I want to hit, I really like the approach our game master took in the current campaign we're running. The entire play group is queer, but we were acquaintances online before, but none of us had played games together previously. And even before Session Zero, he reached out to everybody and kind of got this information, like what are your no-goes, what are your likes, what do you want to do? Brought all that together, and then we met together to actually have the Session Zero where he brought up some of these points, and if people weren't comfortable bringing them up himself, he brought them up as just issues the group had raised and things that we could discuss, so people didn't have to bring that up in front of the rest of the group. With this group, it didn't really matter, but I still like that he took that approach to make it, a safe starting place for everybody to work on what they want and to get out of the game. And it's been a really successful group so far. So, I think that was a good starting point for it. And just making sure everybody knew what at least the starting expectations were there.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and start taking some questions, and then we'll move on from there. In the back there.
On that same subject, when we feel uncomfortable in a situation where we don't necessarily have the opportunity to do Session Zero, so that we're playing a public game,
Sure.
like Adventures League or something like that, and we recently played with a player who chose to bring basically a fetish character to a public game.
Right.
And it made at least the two of us, that I communicated with very uncomfortable. Like we didn't want to be there anymore,
Sure.
but because it was a public game, we were signed up and stuff, it was awkward, we just didn't know how to handle it. So we just kind of sat there and just dealt with it. Are there any ways to deal with that don't involve just kind of having to eat it?
So the question is, in a situation where you don't have the opportunity to do a Session Zero and kind of have all of that laid out, when someone shows up and kind of presents either a character or some content, what are some good ways for kind of navigating your discomfort versus, what's appropriate at the table and that sort of thing?
For a public game, I would honestly say, hey, I know we just sat down at the table, but can I talk to you? Talk to the GM. Because, especially at a convention that you paid to come to and you want to have a good time, I think it's okay to say, you know, maybe this game is not what I thought it was going to be, or maybe this group isn't going to gel with me. Just ask for like a couple minutes of the DM's time, step away if you can, and go, you know, this character is making me uncomfortable. I know it's a public game. However, can you either as a DM do something, or are you, because a lot of times public games, if two of you get up and walk away, then there's not enough people to play.
Right.
But at the end of the day, your comfort should come first. Because if someone shows up with a kinky character or something, and it's a daytime session at a public convention, I did not agree to this. This is not okay. And it'd be the same thing if somebody's walking around in a leash and a collar and fetish gear during the day at an event. It's like, you know, I'm not kink shaming, but family event, maybe you should think about that and read the room, because you don't know people.
They didn't consent to be part of your scene, so.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing wrong with self-care and going, you know what, this isn't for me. I am uncomfortable, and not make a scene of it, but just, you know, like maybe take the DM aside and go, you know, this isn't okay with me. That's not what I wanted when I sat at the table. I'm not blaming you, but I'm going to gracefully bow out of this. There's nothing wrong with getting up and leaving.
Yeah. I also think after the fact, it is valuable to provide that feedback to the convention organizers and to say, hey, you know, I don't know if you're aware that this situation comes up, but this is what happened, and it might be worth you considering to have policies in place that take this sort of thing into consideration, that you tell your game masters, that you tell your people who are volunteering and organizing, that, you know, sometimes, you know, these things are going to make people feel uncomfortable at the table, and they're going to have to be prepared to deal with that as far as that goes, because sometimes it'll just be, you know, we didn't think of that.
I often, when I have a chance at conventions, will be the surprise DM occasionally for Adventurers League tables. And one of the things I always do when I am DMing for strangers is I will go around at the beginning and ask each of them not only to introduce themselves in the real world, but to describe their character. Now, part of that, I do that to set the scene for the role-playing game. But it is also actually a way for me to sniff that kind of thing out before we start playing. And so my recommendation is if your DM at a convention game doesn't ask for sort of an initial introduction of character, you can just innocently say, oh, hey, how about we go around and describe sort of what makes each of our characters tick. Because first off, most of the time it just means you're going to hear some cool character descriptions, and it's going to make it easier to imagine everyone else's character. But it also means if there's going to be something that's going to be difficult for you in the game, you're more likely to detect it right away, and can maybe in that initial introduction bring it up with the DM, as Tanya mentioned, or even pass a note to the DM if you're not comfortable verbally bringing up your concern. So again, I just think that's a good technique, and if the DM has forgotten to do it, most DMs will be happy to pause to have everyone go around the table and describe your character bit, because that will almost always smoke that kind of thing out right away. And then there can be a conversation before, you know, you're already 30 or 45 minutes into the game and you're like, oh God, where did this come
what
from?
have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
Right.
And if they even recognize that, or if it reminds them, hey, maybe that's a good thing for us to implement, or just, you know, test that out, because, you know, if anybody hasn't, you know, that's where somebody can say, you know, pause, or hey, no, there's problems, kind of similar to the X card, but sometimes it just go a little more.
Yeah, checking in to see if there are any table like safety systems in place can sometimes not just be an inquiry on your part, but particularly say, like, if you know you had just encountered that and I was running the game and somebody had presented this character and then you turned to me and asked, are there any sort of table safety mechanisms at work? I could probably put two and two together.
Yeah.
Right? That could be a relatively decent way of kind of signaling, like,
There's a
maybe,
concern.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Maybe there are some concerns. All right.
This sort of, I think, kind of relate to the idea of sexuality we talked about earlier, and also like, so when we play tabletop games, a lot of times they're in fantasy medieval settings.
Sure.
And a lot of times people want to like value the historical accuracy. They like want to include like phobia
Sure.
or things like that. And so like, what do you feel about that argument versus like let's just not?
Sure. So the question, let me repeat the question really quickly for the recording. So the question is, occasionally you may find yourself at tables where some version of historical accuracy, quote unquote, is being used to justify marginalizing or bigoted points of view and styles of play, and what are some ways that we may be able to address that?
Can I jump in before Tanya has her aneurysm?
Wow.
No. I'm giving you a moment because you looked like you needed one.
I'm just staring at the glass of wine back there.
Yeah.
That might get over your
I
head.
actually almost wore my shirt today that Nikki made, or Mickey made, that says, you can believe in dragons, but not in black people. So that's a thing that does come up a lot, and
We just did a panel on it, literally, before
yeah,
this panel.
right. So first of all, if it's a fantasy setting, it's not historically accurate. I mean, I don't know what you're wanting. Like, if it's very specifically set in France in 1378, that's one thing. But also, they don't know what they're talking about. Most people have no idea what the historical setting was at the time. They have this mental image of what the Middle Ages were like based on stuff that's on TV. So I think it's important to, I mean, honestly, one thing I would do would be like, cite your work. If you think that this is historically accurate, I want, a bibliography. I want you to show me with something peer-reviewed probably, that this, I don't want a Wikipedia article. I want to see your sources where you tell me that this was a thing that actually happened, and then probably I still won't care because, again, we're not in France in 1378. But like, if people really want to push that, oh, it's historically accurate, then say, okay, well, give me something that proves that this was something that would have happened at this time, if you just really want to be like that, which I am.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah, indeed.
Were you going to say something before I do have an aneurysm?
So this gives me an aneurysm also for several reasons, because, again, to echo, it's fantasy. It's also entertainment, so it's
Right.
about all of us having a good time.
Right.
It also drives me insane as a person who, in my previous academic life, studied the ancient world. 9 times out of 10, what people say, especially on the internet, but also at convention games, about what's historically accurate, 9 times out of 10, they are wrong. If someone sees a lineup of characters in a quasi-medieval setting and they object to seeing a person of color, they are wrong. They were people of color in medieval Europe, and there is plenty of historical evidence for this. If they say it's outrageous that there are open queer people and this is supposed to be a historically accurate setting. Okay, and again, I'm just putting, for the sake of argument, let's pretend we care that it's historically accurate in a game with dragons and people shooting lightning out of their fingers. But let's say we actually care. Most people don't realize, because of the closeting of history, that we could go to medieval Spain, and there was a period of time where in urban centers in Spain, there were members of the Catholic Church hierarchy who were open about their homosexuality. And there was a period of time where it was thought that it would be accepted before there was a massive backlash. So it really, when you talk about history, it's like, well, which point in history? And which
Interpretation of
which,
history.
and which nation are we talking about, and which year, and which month in that year? The tapestry of history is so diverse, and a lot of people, unfortunately, because of how Eurocentric a lot of the education is, but again, even saying Eurocentric it's like a very narrow definition of European history that excludes people of color and the contributions of women and the contributions of queer people. They end up with this extremely inaccurate view of the ancient world that then, this sort of their historically accurate fantasy in their head is often just as disconnected from reality as people shooting lightnings out of their fingers.
Speaking of shooting lightning, though, if somebody claims historical accuracy in like a fantasy game or anything like this, I'm not a big fan of just smiting player characters, but that's a good excuse for whatever god or divine being is in that universe, just to smite them at that point.
Well, and also, I would remind them about Othello, the Moors. Yeah. I would also ask if they've ever actually taken a history class. Because despite what people think, black people were not invented with slavery. Yeah. And I'm being sarcastic, but I've had people do that, and I know I'm probably going to regret saying this, but when I was at GDC once at a writer's symposium, someone tried to defend The Witcher with historical accuracy, but Poland and Polish mythology, and I was like, Zeracania is in The Witcher, and there are brown people there. Yes, we're DLC, but we still exist. No, literally, we're DLC. And, but there's also brown people in the books. But at the end of the day, if someone actually seriously tries to bring historical accuracy to you about a fantasy game or medieval setting, tell them to look up Othello, the Moors, look at medieval POC, who looks at art history and debunks a lot of this, both in an academic way and a layperson way, where you can go, look at all this art history, and it's not stuff people made up. I've been in New York and gone to a castle and seen a black knight that was depicted in a medieval setting in armor that is period accurate. And if people are that determined to stick to their racism, don't play games with them.
No.
That's the long and the short of it.
Yeah.
If they're that determined to use historical accuracy, say, well, you can't be a black character, you can't be brown people didn't exist, they would have been servants. Go, you know what? I'm going to find some non-racist people over in this other corner, goodbye.
Well, and oh, sorry, I was just going to say, and queerness too, because we're here talking about queerness, because that's another thing. And like, I remember one time some guy asked a question, and he was like, well, what's the point of the game if I want the tension, I want the homophobia and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, it's very obvious that you are not a marginalized person in real life. I am not playing this game so that I have to deal with the same bullshit that I deal with in America in 2020, which feels more like America in 1820. It just comes down to it. It's like, some people don't understand that those things don't need to exist. They literally cannot imagine it, but it's one of those things that it is supposed to be fun for you. And if you don't want to play a game where people are gonna do that, then yeah, I definitely agree with Tanya. Just peace out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the real upshot of it, is the real key is that you don't owe anybody an argument about whether or not something is historically accurate, and if they want to pick a fight about it, then that's their problem. I mean, the key question is, what is more important in this game? Everyone's enjoyment of it, or whether or not it's historically accurate?
Right. The reality is nobody's going to bring that to the table unless they are either using it as a shield for their bigotry, or they have been so hopelessly inundated with this heteronormative, like white-centric vision of what history was, that they don't know enough to even question it, right? As queer people, we kind of have to question all of that constantly. There's a reason that there's sort of this thread of subversiveness that is kind of part of, at least in the Western world, a lot of queer identity, because we are obligated to subvert these kind of points of views constantly, because they don't leave room for us, right? There's no space for us to live in those, and if we don't subvert them, it's going to kill us, right? So at the end of the day, you don't owe anybody that requirement of, you don't owe anybody an education, you don't owe any of that. We have to take care of ourselves. And now, that's easy to say, unless it's your only gaming group, right? Like, it's very easy to say, because, I am a firm believer in one of the White Wolf developers. His name is Ethan Skemp, and we call it Skemp's first rule of good gaming, and that is don't game with assholes. That's easy to say when you've got a lot of options, right? But sometimes you find yourself in just that one position. So yes, like if that's a fight you are willing to go to, be willing to say, hey, maybe that's not fun. Maybe the fact that people are not able in the real world to launch fireballs from their hands, that's not fun. That's why this game has it. So maybe, regardless of what your view is or is not of the historical accuracy of the place of queer people or people of color or women in the setting, maybe we all agree that we're here to have fun, and that is not fun for some of us. And then you corner them and make them admit that it is fun for them, and that's a whole other conversation for the whole group. All right, any other questions? You had a question earlier, did you not?
Yeah, I think we're kind of addressing it.
Okay.
Maybe just to reframe a little bit. Like, I often think of our drink party as analog for queer solidarity. I think it's always very character-rich backgrounds.
I dig that, yeah.
And then every once in a while, I notice that we start replicating small systems of oppression within a group, right? Because we're all trying to experience freedom. We're all trying to experience a bigger personality.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering what you as GMs do with that kind of energy.
Can you give a slightly more concrete example of what you're talking about, just so I make sure that we're...
You can start to see one character get hurt by the group somehow because maybe they did something wrong.
Okay. Sure.
How do you navigate that so it's like an educational experience that everyone can kind of...
So occasionally in gaming groups we may find the sort of systems of social othering that frankly a lot of marginalized people experience kind of bubble to the surface in other ways and kind of play out in a sort of more fictional dynamic. What would be the ways that you can maybe think of to sort of address and look at that? Was that a decent summation? Excellent.
I often, when I see that sort of dynamic starting to bubble to the surface in a group, first I try to make sure to bring a problem to their attention that they can solve together in the game, because few things will bring people back together quicker than a problem they've got to solve together in the story. So essentially I make them all be in danger so that they remember they're there to care for each other, they're there to protect each other. So really kind of reset that. If I find that someone is, even when they've been knitted back together in the story, if somebody is sort of being a poop, my favorite thing to do is to address it in world, because what I find is sometimes you just, as a DM, have to have a frank conversation with a player. But I find it is amazingly effective to instead have an NPC call them on their crap in the game. And so I will often have somebody show up and just sass them. And there's also a certain safety as a DM to do it, because it's then your NPC sassing their character, right. And which then also makes it easier for them to take it, because they might not be as inclined to be as defensive if I as a DM come to them as a player. If it's instead, crotchety NPC, wags their finger at their character, then their character might roll with it better, and then often through that avenue, the player will get it.
That's a tough one because, sort of a spoiler, but the way that Season 5 of Rivals concluded is that one of our player characters we found out he was deceiving us the entire time. My character's a paladin of Steere. And she's not very happy with him, shall we say?
Yeah.
She football carried him out of Avernus, and he's going to have a very bad day when we go back to our season. But that's hard because I keep coming back to, we're supposed to have fun. I'm not there to necessarily educate someone on bad behavior, especially at the table. partially because that's my day job. That is what I do for not fun and for money and for a lot of stress. So I don't want to do that at the table. But if it happens to come up, because we're also unique in that we are all people of color, some of us queer as well, and we don't want to replicate that oppression at the table, whether it be player bad behavior, whether it be NPC behavior. We did do a thing where one of our characters is a tiefling. And we did you're profiling me because I'm a tiefling, right? But it worked because we're all brown, and we've unfortunately had that experience. But had I watched a show where it was not all people of color doing this, or even all white people doing this, I'd be like, wait a minute, hold on, why are you doing this? This is not okay, because you have not actually experienced this. So when you talk about bringing oppression to the table and a player doing this, it's kind of hard because as a queer person, and yes, I know there's internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, if someone does that, especially without consent of the group and they're working through some things, that's really hard because it can break the group dynamic. And as a GM, if someone did that, I'd be concerned about them as a person, especially if this is something they're doing and we didn't discuss it as a storyline and it just comes up. I'd be more concerned with them as a person at that moment. But if it's something we've discussed and it's very calculated, I'd want everyone's buy-in because everyone may not be okay with that, like how we've talked about racism and other things. Maybe I don't want to deal with this at the table unless we've all bought into it, and then it's a little weird. I don't know. I may be rambling in this, but I don't feel something like that could or should be an educational moment without everyone's buy-in and okay.
Yeah, and I think that's an important. Note, actually, to some degree. Like, I mean, we've mentioned before that role-playing often can create moments of vulnerability between people, but unless the people who are sort of running and facilitating do indeed have that sort of professional training, no one should feel obligated, and in fact should sort of avoid situations where they're trying to use the game therapeutically, right? Like, at the end of the day, it is okay to say, hey, there may be things kind of being worked on, but I don't think this is the appropriate venue for that. I'm certainly not trained enough to know that we're doing that in a way that is safe and healthy, and I don't know that anybody else here is either. But being willing to say, hey, so that look, I know you're just trying to kind of replicate a setting style of bigotry, right? Like like, you know, somebody in the party decides to distrust the tiefling. Well, you know, you obviously have the blood of the hells and blah, blah, blah. But if that gets into kind of mirroring real world marginalization, even if the player of the tiefling is not the one who experiences that, anybody at that table, it's okay to say, can we pull back on that? On that aspect of things. Can we not, like, we know it exists in the setting, we can just sort of assume that it happens if the setting requires it, without anybody ever actually saying anything or engaging in it, to say nothing of players who are basically supposed to be on the same side doing that to one another. Like, I feel that's a very reasonable request to make, sort of as a table rule. All right, any other questions? Yeah.
I am fortunate that I get to play with a bunch of queer people. But I don't have as much of a lens into this stuff myself.
Sure.
And there's this temptation sometimes to create shortcuts, solutions, a magic item that will change your gender expression at will.
Sure.
Maybe that's exactly what someone wants, but I don't know. Is default including that stuff in the setting, in the game, especially when you have strangers showing up? Good, bad?
So the question at play is, sometimes the temptation is there to, the example being used, that sort of just will magically alter gender or sex, pardon me. You know, if that's a good inclusion, or if it's the sort of thing that is maybe like marginalizing in its own way.
My recommendation would be, especially in session 0, see if there's a desire among any of the players for that capability, and then you can certainly provide it, because there's no reason not to. If someone is like, I would really love to have this as part of my character's story, I often view our job as DMs to just, basically be happiness makers for our players. But if you don't have that specific communication, my recommendation would be to instead provide magical opportunities that have an array of possibilities. For instance, there could be, a magic potion that allows a person to change any of their physical characteristics. Then it's really on the user to decide what that means, how far they want to go. Basically, always remember you have your players as your co-creators. And so to me, it's much more about, as a DM, providing an array of options and letting them decide how to steer those, how deeply they want to go, and basically let them make that decision, rather than getting so narrow, which is why you'll often see even the official things we produce for the game tend to be pretty broad. If you look at a spell like Alter Self in the player's handbook, it's this massive sort of realm of possibility, and that's very much on purpose, to basically let players decide how they want to dig into those magical possibilities to tell the story they want to tell about their character.
All right. So when it comes to, and rather than speaking to what an individual character is looking for or this sort of thing, when it comes to world building, I am a big proponent in that we should include a variety of forms of liberation, primarily because until those forms of liberation exist within that setting, the people for whom that is liberating are experiencing unintentional marginalization, right? I basically won't play in a fantasy setting that doesn't provide, for example, the assumption of free and general birth control for women, right? So a setting that goes out of its way to say that such a thing does not exist is choosing to enact a form of limitation that is not acceptable. So my settings have to have that. It exists there. I feel the very same way about a setting that provides some method, whether it's herbal, it's alchemical, it's magical, it's medicinal, whatever, that provides the opportunity for transition for characters who indeed do wish to transition. Like that, I feel like a setting, again, at least for me, needs to have that there in order to provide, to not impose an artificial limitation on characters of those identities. And so it can be, now if you're talking about the exact specific ways of doing so, right? Like, what exactly are we? Is it just a potion? Can anybody use this? Blah, blah, blah. Honestly, talk to queer people. Talk to people of that identity. They would love to help you brainstorm, because frankly, most of us are coming up with, in my ideal world, this is what it would look like, right?
Right.
And so a lot of us will be happy to share some ideas. But the same is true of because you mentioned you game with a lot of queer people, of literally any queer content. If you ever have any hesitation, obviously no one is obligated to play, educator or idea generator with you, but chances are pretty good that someone is going to want a way to contribute to the world or the story that you're building, and will share that happily.
Also, bribery is good. Like, I don't feel like if you're talking to a friend and you want advice on something, if you want to come to me and say, okay, I want to include more black characters in my story, but I don't want them to be stereotypical. Can you help me with this? Well, if you feed me,
Right.
then I'm a lot more likely to do it. And if I don't have to like write you a long ass email about, I don't know, stuff like that, because I want to get paid for that. But if we're friends and you take me out to lunch and you fill me full of macaroni and cheese, suddenly I'm extremely willing to educate you on things.
Yes.
Wait, only mac and cheese?
Well, no, all sorts of things. I'm craving macaroni and cheese. So.
Now I want macaroni.
Now, so are we. Thanks.
Good job, Bianca. Good job.
So one thing I wanted to say too is also about the normalization of queer content in settings. Oftentimes there's, both from the creator perspective, and I conclude game masters as creators in their own right as far as this goes, there's often a temptation to put a big rainbow sign on some queer content that draws big attention to it, when oftentimes what we really want is that sense that we're just a part of the world like everything else. It's just sometimes pleasant to go to the inn that is run by the nice woman and her wife, and to see what a lovely place they've created together, or to, hear about the, vizier talking about his son's upcoming nuptials and how much he likes his future husband, and things like that, that just give the characters the sense that they are not the only queer people in this setting, but there in fact is a thriving number of queer people of all different kinds all over the world. So like one of the recent examples when I was doing a sample adventure for The Expanse was an adventure that wasn't focused specifically on queer content, but it was a story that involved a romantic pairing, and I was like, well, I'm just going to make it, a queer couple, because why not? Yeah. Queer people exist, and it wasn't necessarily about that, but it was just an element of the story.
Speaking from the consumer side especially, is I really do appreciate story points where like important people or even unimportant people, like the inn owner and stuff, are queer, and it's just normal though. Their conflicts have nothing to do with their queerness. It's their political position or something else. But it's that is what I want to see more of in general in games, is just that queer people exist and they're just living out their lives. And that's not something that makes them special in the setting.
Yeah, that has been our approach in D&D for a number of years now, where the queer people are as matter-of-factly present as everybody else. We are even doing this now in our sort of broader market effort. So this past year we came out with a set called the Essentials Kit that was initially a Target exclusive. It's now available more widely. But even in that starter set, which we know a lot of families are using to learn how to play D&D, one of the quests you can go on is to help these gnome kings who are married to each other. And in the adventure, we never comment on the fact that these are two men married to each other, and what's remarkable about them is they're gnomes, and they have a wacky cave that you go into with all sorts of crazy inventions, and something is wrong and you need to help them. We made it so that in some ways the fact that they're two male gnomes married to each other is the least interesting thing about them, and it's just completely matter of fact.
I was just going to say, something I do run into myself, how do I put this? Don't blame yourself if your first inclination when you're doing something is to follow a heteronormative pattern. Because like I was writing something and I was like, the wife of this man, and then I suddenly was like, wait a second. That person doesn't have to be a man. It could be the wife of that wife. But it's so ingrained
It is.
in you, and there's only so much we can fight our conditioning. So don't feel bad if your first instinct is, kind of to go along with what society tells you it should be. You can go and change that later. But I feel like I start to feel guilty because I will do things that aren't queer enough. So sometimes I have to sit down with myself and be like, okay, calm down. You're getting a little excessive here. So I just think it's important to give yourself a little room to realize that you're dealing with a lot of societal pressures, and a lot of things that you were raised with are not things that you have to be attached to, but they're the first things that come up in your head.
That really resonates with me, because even though, I've been doing this for years now, putting queer characters into books, I still will have these moments of the sort of, that tiny, tiny little, homophobic doubt that's somewhere inside me that, have I done it too much? And I always come around, no, we can do more. More. Because the thing is, even if, let's say, you decide to just set off a glitter nuke in your game or in your book.
Dream.
Remember, given the decades and decades and decades and decades of material that's out there,
Right.
there are still plenty of straight people for all the straight people. And so, again, if that glitter bomb goes off, everyone's going to be fine.
Yes.
And I mean,
Straight people are literally a renewable resource.
Yes.
We're gonna
Whether
see
you
glitter
want them
nuke in
to
the next
be
MF
or
Montana,
not.
right?
Yes.
I think, in other words, make it gay, you cowards.
It's true. All right, well, and I do believe that's the end of our time for this panel. So, thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your being here. And really quickly, I'd like us to run down the table and talk about the social media where we can be found and that sort of thing. Once again, I'm Joseph Carriker. I can be found on Twitter at @OakThorn, oak like the tree, thorn with an E at the end of it, all one word.
I'm Steve Kenson. I too am on the Twitters at @SKenson, KENSON.
Taya, Twitter at Taya Transcends, or Mastodon, Taya Transcendent at Woodburg.social, and I think there's still slips over there from my panel yesterday that have our social media on it, so that makes
There you
sense.
go.
You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy E. Crawford.
You can find me everywhere pretty much as Cypher of Tears, CYPHEROFTYR. That's Twitch, Twitter, Tumblr, AO3 if you want to go find fanfic. It's all smutty fanfic.
Just not the Power Rangers.
Oh no one's finding that ever.
I am so curious now.
I may tell you if you buy me many drinks.
I'm Bianca Anderson, and I am on Twitter as Glitter and Goth, so like Glitter and Goth, but you got lazy and only put an N in between them. And if for some reason you want to follow me on Instagram for like the rare occasion that I post pictures of my cats, that is Glitter and Goth, because I had not fully branded yet.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.